Hi, we're Ralph and Lonnie back with another forecast, this time for August 2018. And this month begins carrying the emotional weight that comes from the series of 3 eclipses that concluded on the 11th. The effects taper off as we approach the 3rd eclipse, after which the emotional climate will lighten. Thank goodness.
Oh, really?
Putting that aside, the month starts well on the 1st with the passionate Aries moon trying the gregarious Leo sun. It's all fire, fire, right?
Oh, yeah.
So high energy is available. Caution, the Mars square Uranus could penalize the loss of physical control with unexpected, unpleasant results.
Ooh.
On the 6th, Venus enters her ruling sign of Libra. I think you gave people a heads up about that last month, right?
Yes, I did.
Becoming the belle of the ball for the rest of the month, highlighting relationship issues and the need for grace to illuminate our world. On the 7th, Uranus recently arrived in Taurus. Uranus in Taurus always seems a little incongruous to me, doesn't it? But then it turns retrograde. So project innovation as well as insurrections may slow your progress. He's going to tell you what he meant by that when he wrote that down.
Yes.
On the 9th, conflicts between fatherly Saturn and darling Venus, coupled with a day-long void of course, makes this time awkward. Add to that complexity the anticipation of the new moon eclipse 2 days hence on the 11th, and then on the 12th, the turbulence from Mars retrograding into Capricorn. That makes the 4 days from the 9th through the 12th tricky to navigate. At least by the 13th, Left-Handers Day,
Yes.
the eclipse series is over and Mercury is stationing in preparation for going direct. On the 18th, a white circle day suitable for all kinds of wonderful activities. Heads up, historically, 3 to 6 weeks after a triple eclipse series, there's a dramatic drop in the markets. But don't worry, they recover. On the 20th, a nice sun-trine moon helps everything move more smoothly. On the 22nd, the sun enters practical Virgo, coincidentally conjunct the fixed star Regulus, the heart of the lion. You can practically feel that heart-based warmth rolling over everybody. On the 25th, a white circle day, sports a pair of trines and Jupiter being on friendly terms with the moon. Do things outside of the ordinary and for the common good. The full moon on the 26th is challenging. Returning students may suffer from a reality check.
Yes.
It always cracks me up that students return now in August because September used to be the ideal month for it.
Yes.
But as long as it's in Virgo, I'm kind of jiggy with it.
There you go. Yes.
On the 27th, Mars gratefully turns direct, so some underlying frustrations will pass. On the 31st, a practical trine between Virgo Sun and Taurus Moon helps to smooth the way for practical projects.
Yes.
That's practically my mantra.
Yes.
Smooth the way for practical projects.
This
I like
month.
that.
This month is a little schizophrenic because of that eclipse. You know, normally eclipses come in pairs, but now and then you get these
Triples.
these triples, these threefers. You know, and that gives you an extended period of time between these eclipses, and which tend to be emotionally complex. So that first part of the month, up to that new moon on the 11th, you know, it's gonna feel complicated. It's gonna feel emotionally complicated. You know, and this is in you know, Leo, and Leo doesn't really do complicated. Leo's all about, you know, the bright sun clarifying everything, making everything open. They say that for astrologers, when we do the charts for businesses, we do it for noontime when the sun is the highest, because it's a way of saying, well, everything is out in the open, which is the sun. It uncomplicates things.
The light of day, high noon.
What's complicated about going to the beach? There's sand, there's water, there's suntan lotion. You know, that's pretty much it.
I think it's kind of interesting here that, and I may be skipping ahead, and you can go back if you want to, but I think it's kind of interesting that last month Venus changed signs, and the very next day Jupiter went direct. And this month, the day after Venus again changes signs, Uranus goes retrograde. So she's
Yeah.
kind of following in cycles, kind of in sync with these other big guys.
Yeah, it's very interesting, especially because when Venus moves into Libra, she becomes the planet in rulership. Now, the other point in rulership right now is the Sun, and when a point is in rulership, it really gets to be who it wants to be. And normally, who's ever in rulership is pretty much running the chart. They get the biggest voice. So you have both the Sun, the heart, and Venus, the desire to connect, both in rulership this month.
And Venus does co-ruler very well.
Yes, better than anybody, in fact. She finds all kinds of ways to get along. While
Yeah.
Uranus turning retrograde, and Uranus is just recently in Taurus, is definitely chaotic. Uranus is normally chaotic, and so as Uranus went into Taurus, we know that it's going to affect financial markets. It's going to affect real estate. It's going to affect food, how people view food and farming and agriculture. When it goes retrograde, there'll be some bursts of this as you go forward, and then when it turns retrograde, you're going to feel like, well, maybe we moved forward too fast. So, but this is going to be on a bigger picture, unless you're born with the Sun in Taurus or the Moon in Taurus or a major planet in Taurus, then it's affecting you personally. So keep that in mind.
I think it's also interesting, going back to these kind of planetary motions here, to note that last month as well as this month, when Jupiter turned direct, and now when Uranus is going retrograde, it's during a very long void course on the whole day, which
Yes.
I think is kind of a nice thing, because if it's void of course, you're also not really trying to get sort of a lot of energy towards getting something done. And the fact is that whether the planet is going retrograde or direct, especially when they're big planets like Jupiter and Uranus, it creates a lot of turbulence, and so it could create a situation, if it wasn't void of course, if the moon wasn't void of course at that time, that turbulence could affect you emotionally a little bit more. So if you're kind of stepping back a little bit, let the planet change sign, wait until the next day to move ahead with the energy of those planets or where they're finding their new positions, it's a little bit better.
Yes. So basically, you should look forward to Left-Handers Day, the 13th of August, and because you know that Left-Handers Day is going to help you. By then, it's going to calm down, and you have to remember that of our most recent presidents, a predominance of them, something like 40% of them, were all left-handers.
Well, and we have to mention that the day before Left-Handers Day, Mars enters Capricorn. So that's going to be a real stabilizing effect. That's a exaltation position for Mars.
But he's
so,
backpedaling into it.
we have to also mention why we highlight Left-Handers Day
Yes.
as one of the holidays that we kept in here.
Yes.
And it's because that's the day that we met.
Yes.
I'm left-handed.
Yes,
So
exactly.
it's a little romance
It is a little
that you
romance.
wouldn't know about if you didn't get to watch this show.
That's true.
See?
We don't share it with just everybody, So now the thing that's interesting about Mars is Mars has been retrograde in the first part of this month and part of last month too, or actually all of last month. Mars does not do retrograde well. Mars is an external energy, and so when it goes retrograde, all this stuff goes inward, and you're going to see
And it's been retrograde in Aquarius.
like
so
an
it's
Aquarius. Yeah, right.
if your nerves are fried physically,
Yes.
that's why.
And you're going to see, I think during this period of time, July and August, the first part of August, we'll see quite a bit of kind of outbursts because people are just frustrated. Mars retrograde is a very frustrating position. The advantage is when it goes back into Capricorn, that's the exaltation position.
Yes.
It does Capricorn really well. It's a very ambitious position. And then fortunately, Mars
Now it's going to have
turns-
to go forward again but maybe you're a little bit better prepared, having experienced it a little bit. For
Exactly,
a while.
and it goes forward on the 27th. So at the end of this month, at the 27th, actually now that the Sun has moved into Virgo, Mars goes direct in Capricorn. So you have August to kind of straighten these issues out. You had this time to kind of get over that frustration. And the good thing about Mars and Capricorn is that it's very practical. The good thing about Mars retrograde is it makes us focus on ourselves. So maybe it's about the practical things related to yourself. You know, is your diet doing what it's supposed to be doing? Are you getting enough exercise? Are you conscious of your environment? Have you thrown all of the toxic chemicals in terms of toxic cleaning materials out of your house to live in a cleaner, safer environment? Have you given up smoking?
Well, it can also kind of break a cycle of, moving too fast and injuring yourself,
Right.
hitting your head or, doing something before you fully prepare, tripping, being clumsy, all those kind of quirky, out of the blue, how that happened kind of thing happen and kind of slow you down and look at, and examine that so that you can address them for the future.
Right. And now on the 18th and on the 25th, those are white circle days. Remember, they tend to extend before and after. So those 2 weekends, 17, 18, 19, and then 24th, 25th, 26th. Nice. Just nice coasting days, which is a huge advantage and a big help after those three eclipses.
We sometimes hesitate to make a white circle day on a day when a planet changes direction, but since you've all been waiting for Mercury
Yes.
to go direct, we were like, yay, let's have a party,
Yeah.
So, especially since Mercury's in a nice sextile with Venus, so
Right.
that helps.
And it's also because this is after the first quarter, so the moon is going to, is heading towards full, so energy is basically rising. Because like I said, that period of time between those eclipses, it tends to be a little diffusing, you might say. And so it's great when you can have energy rising, and Mercury gets itself back onto track, and then, as we mentioned, as you get to the 21st, 22nd, 23rd of the month, the sun is going to be passing over Regulus, the royal star of Leo, the heart of Leo, and it's always just a wonderful time if you let your heart speak. If you're in the situation where you're clamping down on your heart energy all the time and you're not reaching out to other people and being so careful with your words, it's not going to work for you. But if you let yourself kind of open up to the sun, get out into the sun, get out into the outside, connect with people, express your love for people, you're going to find that it resonates beautifully at that time. And people are going to resonate back to you in the same way. What you put out is what you get back.
Well, these white circle days are going to be very different because in between the sun enters Virgo.
Yes.
So, kick your plans back into gear and get back into a schedule. The kids are off back to school.
Yep.
You can, all the things that were kind of like hanging by the wayside, while Mercury was retrograde and in the planning stage, this Mercury goes direct, the sun goes into Virgo, back to work.
And then you have the full moon on the 26th, so energy, and this is usually a pretty nice full moon because it's the summertime full moon. The next day, Mars goes direct in Capricorn, so 26th, 27th, and then on the 31st, you have the sun trine moon after the full moon, which is, it's just a lovely full moon because it's an expressive full moon.
We could have almost made the 31st another white circle day, just because,
easily.
We don't give a lot of weight to the sun parallel moon. It's not nothing, but, it's not the strongest kind of influence that we look for. But when that sun trine moon, we talked about it last month, it really stabilizes between your ideas and your motivation, and it just really is a very helpful day. And with the moon in Taurus,
And Taurus, the most stable, the most gracious of moons, that just, it tends to, as we say in here, how do we put it? The 31st is a practical trine between Virgo sun and Taurus moon, which helps smooth the way for practical projects.
I hope they involve food because
Yes.
I love my Taurus moon so much. I
Yes.
practically can't think of anything that doesn't have anything to do with food.
There you go. So it's a great time to go out to lunch. That Friday would definitely be the day to go out to lunch.
When we go out to lunch together and we place our order and the food comes and he looks at me and says, "Why does your food always look better than mine?" I said, "You should listen to me. I've
has
got
the
the
Taurus
Taurus moon.
moon."
This is my purpose in life."
So thank you for joining us again. Come back and see us next month for another part of Planetary Calendar.
Bye. Hi, we're Ralph and Lonnie D'Amicus with another astrological minute or 10. And today we thought we would talk about the big three. What is your sun, moon, and rising sign, and what has it done for you lately? These are the most personal parts of your chart, and they're frankly what people first learn about. I mean, just beyond sun sign astrology, you get to the sun, moon, rising
Yeah.
triumvirate, and that gives you a lot of in-depth look at you and your personality and your identity.
And realize that this is part of the basic trilogy that we see throughout nature, that tendency for things to happen in threes, after all. The good things happen in threes, bad things happen in threes. Well, sun, moon, rising, and it's basically the sun is your spirit, the rising is your physical body, and the moon is your emotions.
So in that vein, the sun can give you insights into your sense of self and character, your ego, your identity. But as you view yourself and as you, deal with the world from your personal perspective. Whereas the rising sign really can give you insights into your physical appearance or your physical location or how you relate to your physical neighborhood, your area where you are. And the moon, of course, is your emotional nature. We see the effects of the moon on the planet with the tides and things like that, and we have fluid in the body that goes on a cycle, and it's easy to relate that to your emotions.
In some ways, an easy way to think of it is that the sun traditionally relates in some ways to the father. Well, this is very traditional in society, but it was the idea that whatever kind of work your father did was the kind of work that you were going to do. If you came from a family of carpenters, good chance you were going to be a carpenter. If you came up from a family of fishermen, you were going to be a fisherman. That solar central sense
Identity,
of self.
right.
How many people's last names, like Smith or Fisher or Cooper, are names that relate to that family's tradition of working in a particular area. That doesn't really necessarily tell you who the person is, but it does tell you their position in the cosmos, you might say. And I think that's an easy way to think of it. Where the moon, think of how close the word moon is to mother. And so many words that have that connection, emotions. And we learn a lot about our emotional nature and how we relate to the world emotionally from our mother and from the women in our lives, because the men are out there in the world, and the mothers are the ones who give birth to us and then take care of us and raise us up to a certain point until we're ready to start a career, and then we're handed off to the father.
Now, maybe to be a little bit more politically correct in this day and age, we should say that the sun is an indicator in a chart of the person who taught you how to be out in the world.
Right.
And the moon is an indicator of the person who taught you to love and feel loved and deal with your inner world.
And to be at home even, where the moon oftentimes relates to how we live within our home.
And sometimes the genders of that are not exactly aligned with the old preconceived ideas of masculine and feminine. And so this is a different way to look at that. And then, of course, we get to the rising.
Yes.
Which is kind of your personality. I mean, we do a 3-number numerological system that has a character number, a motivation number, and a personality number. And it really relates to the sun, moon, and rising in your chart, the energy, not the exact sun sign or moon sign or rising sign in your chart, but the energy of this numerological pattern relates to the same kind of emotional feeling that these planets would indicate.
It's funny because when you say the sun sign, there's one word of saying it. The moon sign, there's one way of saying it. But when you get to the rising sign, you can say the rising sign, or you can say the ascendant, or the ascending sign, or the ascending degree, because it's a mathematical point. It's basically that point on the eastern horizon in the chart, or when you read a chart, it's the line all the way to the left, which would show the eastern horizon. In some ways, relates to very early morning. It's when the sun pops up over the horizon in your personal life, or when your eyes open up and you go, oh, here I am. That's the ascendant. How do you see the world? how are you seen in the world? And it has a lot to do with physical appearance.
That's a very important point, because no matter where your sun falls within the houses of your chart, the ascendant is the ascendant and marks the first house. So,
And in terms of physicality, and it's so important because this idea of, you only make a first impression first, once. Well, it's very true. And the planets that you find by the rising, is Mars rising, is Venus rising, is Uranus rising. The planets near that rising have a lot to do with how you're seen in the world. For instance, people with the sun rising tend to bring a lot of energy to their first experience. It's a great sign for salesmen, though maybe not quite as good as Mars rising, because sales takes a lot of bravery. So Mars rising means you bring a lot of physical energy to that first meeting. Now, maybe they're not as good at continuing things into the future, but they're great for that first handshake and for that first discussion, because so much energy is concentrated there. And it's interesting, when you look at the charts of very famous salespeople, so many of them are born right by the rising, very close to the ascending sign. Their sun is there, or they have a cluster of planets right there, because they bring a lot of energy to that initial experience.
well, your sun in the first house is kind of what you see is what you get.
Yes.
There's a lot of times, when you meet someone physically in the world, you're actually first meeting their first house, their rising sign, their personality, what they want to show to the world, the way that they see the world and the way they are seen by the world. But then when you add the sun to that component, that's their identity and their calling and their their characters. So you really get a feeling like that person very quickly when they have the sun there. And if their moon is in the first house, close to the rising sign, you get a feeling of a very emotional person, like an intuitive person, or a very person who can really understand your feelings very easily, because their moon is the first thing that you meet. And so you get to feel like you know them on an emotional level much sooner than someone who might have the moon in the 10th house or the 8th house.
Now, the sun moves a degree per day, very steady. The moon actually changes a degree about every 2.5 hours. So it goes to maybe 12 degrees in a day, or sometimes less. The moon actually varies its speed a little bit. What does this sound like? Chessboards. The sun is the king. The king moves one step up at a time. But the queen, the moon, can go all the way across the board and change here and do all kinds of things. And it has a lot to do with that difference between that solar self, we are who we are, and our emotional self, which changes direction a lot, and you never know where it's going to be, and it's going to be flexible and adjust. And it's like how people see us in the world. If a person's in a profession, that's their sun. But how, what's their family like? You come in and you walk into their office, and there's the sign on the door saying what they do. But then you come in, and there behind their desk, there's a picture of all their family and their kids and their cousins, and there's this whole complex mix of things. And this is really the big difference. It's the sun, moon, spirit, soul in many ways.
And I think we should talk just for a minute about the rising, because the rising degree changes 1 degree of the sign every 4 minutes.
Yes.
So it used to be that people would come, they would arrange a consultation with us, and we would calculate the charts in advance. They'd take 3 hours or so to calculate by hand. Some of the more complicated charts that we use nowadays would take up to 10 hours to calculate by hand.
Computers are so cool.
And so the person would finally come, at the time they're supposed to come for a consultation. They say, oh, silly me, I found out that I wasn't born at 8 a.m. I was born at 8 p.m. Does it make a difference? We go, yeah, go away. Come back in a week. I mean, we have to recalculate all of the charts that we calculated, because every 4 minutes there's a different degree on the rising or on the ascendant. So you can imagine for 12 hours, you're totally not,
No.
Taurus rising anymore. I mean, that's, just a given. So
that's a different person.
So anything that we had prepared or had in our mind, thank goodness we have computers now. We can calculate that in a minute. And in fact, if you don't know your sun, moon, rising, there are many chart services that can calculate that for you, and at least you can figure out the symbols, the glyphs for the sun, moon, and rising, and you can figure out those three dynamics of your chart, even if you don't have the opportunity to delve into your chart a little bit more deeply.
Yeah, and in fact, you actually know that when, like for instance in the planetary calendar, that when the moon is going through the sign of either your moon or your rising, it will tend to be a more emotional day for you, in a good way, hopefully in a good way. And that's, if you know that, you kind of couch your life in that way. Make sure you're going to be around people who you like.
And I'm glad you brought up using the calendar, because when you're using the calendar, of course, above the number are the glyphs, the symbols that denote the planets.
Yeah.
And it's one thing to use those glyphs to find the ruler of your sun sign, but you can also use them for the ruler of your rising or your moon to determine what days or actions might be appropriate for you.
In some ways, the planets that are above the number are basically which kids are getting along with mom that day.
Because it's how they relate to the moon, where the moon is.
And because the moon changes sign, moves so fast, that changes, just like in a family, who's your favorite kid today? I love all my kids the same, but today...
Well, and it changes signs completely in every 2.5 days.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
That's a fast-moving, energetic flow.
Now, there's one other point. Most people know that, the sun, moon, rising, they know about that. But there's actually another point which is very important, which is in the ancient times, and all the way through medieval astrology as well, was considered very important, was the midheaven. And the midheaven is basically another mathematical point like the ascendant, but it's directly over your head. And the way I like to describe it is like the flag above your castle, because it says, what is my career path going to be? You could be born to be a fisherman, but maybe your father had one boat and you have Saturn at the midheaven and Leo, and you want to have 20 boats, because it's at the midheaven. It has to do with how are you going to fulfill your responsibilities in the world, how are you going to climb the cliffs of career. And traditionally, this was always considered one of the 4 most important points, along with the sun, moon, rising. And in some ways, I think, depending upon the person, it can be more important if a person's really, their life is really focused on career or on duty.
Well, and it doesn't mean that whatever the rising sign is going to determine what your midheaven or your career in the end is going to be. It's interesting sometimes to look at and see how one is what you were born into, kind of out of no choice of your own, except for that, cosmic choice that you make to incarnate at that time. And the other one is more what you develop your skills in. And so they can be very different. So it can give us a lot of interesting insights into kind of what your parents might want you to be and what you want to do in the world for your personal satisfaction and success.
And life has duality in it. That's just part of the game. So
exactly. So come visit us again, and you can always see us at spaceandtime.com, and that's another astrological minute. We made it in just a minute, didn't we?
Oh yeah.
Okay.